Right. Welcome to Book by Book for December 14. And tonight we're going to be walking through chapters 17, 18, and 19 of First Kings. And this is when we get to meet Elijah and his confrontation with Ahab and the prophets of Baal. There's a lot of really great stuff that happens in this section. The Book of Kings is really going to focus in on the Northern Kingdom for this week and most of next week as well, or this week and then the next section, because we won't be meeting next week because there's some Church of Super Serve stuff that we're doing, so I won't be able to host this. But this Elijah person, this prophet, he is really one of the most important figures outside of Moses and David in the Old Testament, and Abraham, of course. But Elijah really does have a significant influence on the not just the events of his lifetime, but the perspective of what a prophet does. Elijah shapes that significantly. And then looking forward to the New Testament and the ministry of Jesus, there is an anticipation that one like Elijah would rise up to be the Messiah or connected to the Messiah. And we see that ultimately fulfilled in the life and ministry of John the Baptist. And so, Elijah is just a major player in the Bible. And so as we are walking through this, these next several chapters with Elijah, we should just kind of note what he's up to, what he's doing, how different he is. He didn't write any books, but he is used by God to confront corruption in the Northern Kingdom, and to also be a transition for the next generation of leaders. So he will anoint Elisha and we'll see that today in what we're going to read, but then also the next king, and a foreign king. So he's a kingmaker. He is a anointer of the next prophet. I mean, he's a very important figure all around. And then last week we met Ahab and Jezebel, and their influence on the kingdom of Israel is significant because they brought in, and mainly Jezebel brought in, a authorization of Baal worship from the king down in the northern kingdoms. And this is something that, the other kings, they did. Jeroboam allowed these kinds of things, but we really see Jezebel's influence is very strong in supporting and providing for the prophets of Baal. And so that is a significant piece of this as well, that it is everywhere and it is bad. And so that's part of what motivates Elijah's mission in confronting Ahab, is revealing the failure of Baal to be able to provide for the people of Israel in the way that the people hoped for. And so the confrontation between Elijah and the prophets of Baal is really a confrontation between Yahweh and Baal, and trying to say who is the actual God who can actually take care of the people of Israel. And so let's jump in here, chapter 17, and we'll start with verse 1. Now Elijah the Tishbite from Tishbe in Gilead said to Ahab, "As the Lord, the God of Israel, lives, whom I serve, there will be neither dew nor rain in the next few years, except at my word." Then the word of the Lord came to Elijah, "Leave here, turn eastward, and hide in the Kerith ravine east of the Jordan. You will drink from the brook, and I have directed the ravens to supply you with food there." So he did what the Lord had told him. He went to the Kerith ravine east of the Jordan and stayed there. The ravens brought him bread and meat in the morning, and bread and meat in the evening, and he drank from the brook. So Elijah just shows up, and he goes and confronts the king, and says that there won't be any rain or dew until Elijah says so. And so this is a pretty significant threat there's going to be a famine. There's going to be a drought. Everything is going to fall apart basically for the nation of Israel because of their corruption. And so when we look at Elijah, his name means my God is Yahweh, or Yahweh is my God. And because El is God in Hebrew, and Yah is the short for Yahweh. And so my Yahweh is my God. But then he's from this place called Tishbe. And we don't even know really where that is. But he's just a very mysterious person, just shows up and confronts the king. I don't know where the king was that a man like Elijah could just enter into his presence and tell him these things. But right away there we sense danger for Elijah because the word says, go away, run away from Ahab and go to the place I'm going to show you. And I'll take care of you. And so Elijah is compelled by God to confront Ahab, the corrupt king, but then also he will see God meet his needs. And the way God meets his needs is unique. He's going to go and hide in this ravine, and the birds, the ravens, who are unclean animals, are going to bring bread and meat. Now, the nature of this bread and meat is curious because ravens, they eat carrion. They're scavengers. And so I don't know what kind of meat the Lord is providing for Elijah this way. But Elijah has plenty of food and water for a good long while. All the while, there's no rain and dew happening for the nation. And this is part of the message here that the Lord wants Ahab to understand, is that Baal, who is associated with the rains and the storms and the harvest, Baal is powerless against Yahweh. And so if Yahweh can say to the servants of Baal, you're not going to have any rain, then they should be recognizing that Baal is worthless. He's nothing. And so, so this is the confrontation. And so every day, twice a day, Elijah's eating fine, and the nation is experiencing this famine, this drought and famine because of their wickedness and their worship of Baal. And let's keep going. Verse 7. Sometime later, the brook dried up because there had been no rain in the land. Then the word of the Lord came to him, Elijah, saying, go at once to Zarephath in the region of Sidon and stay there. I have directed a widow there to supply you with food. So he went to Zarephath. When he came to the town gate, a widow was there gathering sticks. He called to her and asked, would you bring me a little water in a jar so I may have a drink? As she was going to get it, he called and bring me, please, a piece of bread. As surely as the Lord your God lives, she replied, I don't have any bread, only a handful of flour in a jar and a little olive oil in a jug. I am gathering a few sticks to take home and make a meal for myself and my son, that we may eat it and die. Elijah said to her, don't be afraid. Go home and do as you have said. But first, make a small loaf of bread for me from what you have and bring it to me, and then make something for yourself and your son. For this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. The jar of flour will not be used up, and the jug of oil will not run dry until the day the Lord sends rain on the land. And we'll pause here. So the Lord tells Elijah to go to Zarephath in Sidon. And this is a different country. And this is where Baal is from. Like Baalism the influence was coming from Sidon to the northern kingdom of Israel. And so he crosses into enemy territory and is serve as a servant of Yahweh going into the land that Baalism is supposed to be most powerful, you would think, because these are his people. And so we see the effects of the drought. It's not just in Israel, it's in the northern kingdoms as well. So Yahweh's power, as we're reading this, we need to recognize Yahweh's power is not limited to geography. It's not limited to just Dan to Beersheba in the northern kingdom, where God can display his might over Baal. And so this widow, who is a vulnerable person in this society already, because she probably didn't have any land, she didn't have any way to make any money to provide for her and her son, and so she is just trying to scavenge enough supplies to start a fire to cook her last meal for her and her son. And so this person, who is ultimately, like, in the grand scheme of things, is an insignificant player in the geopolitical power plays of the world and in the supernatural realm. Like, Baal isn't really thinking about her, but Yahweh is. And so Yahweh sends Elijah to this widow in enemy territory, and Elijah meets her at the gates. And this is where hospitality would be found for a foreigner coming into a town. The town gates are where people would be able to direct to the best resources to take care of strangers. And hospitality is a major deal in the ancient world, and in the Middle East even now. Hospitality is a significant thing. And if somebody asks for your help, it's your duty to provide for them. And so what Elijah's asking for here is not an unusual request. Can I have some water and some bread? But her life is such that she's like, I got nothing, and we're about to die, because this whole region hasn't had rain for so long. And so he's like, well, no, trust me. Go do what you're going to do, but make me that cake too, and you'll see that the Lord will provide for you and for your son. And so verse 15, so she went away and did as Elijah had told her. So there was food every day for Elijah and for the woman and her family. For the jar of flour was not used up, and the jug of oil did not run dry, in keeping with the word of the Lord spoken by Elijah. And so God is making a miraculous provision here for this woman, even though it's not raining. She's still going to have flour. So there's no new harvest happening that's providing for her. It is a miracle of multiplication that she is experiencing just in her household, because she was faithful to provide for God, for Yahweh's servant. And so now that she, instead of being cared for by the ravens, he has a person that is caring for her, and she's able to provide, caring for him, and she's able to provide for her and her son. It's a beautiful thing. Verse 17, though, things take a turn. Sometime later, the son of the woman who owned the house became ill. He grew worse and worse, and finally stopped breathing. She said to Elijah, "What do you have against me, man of God? Did you come to remind me of my sin and kill my son?" So her reaction here is, remember, she is in the northern kingdom, or in Sidon, and this is where Baalism is being most accepted, and this is her people. And so Yahweh, the servant of Yahweh, coming into her house now, she's wondering, is this a punishment because of all the times that I have served Baal and not served Yahweh? So are you punishing me now for my sin? And so it's a very fatalist perspective on life, and just thinking that God is out to smite and destroy her specifically. And so Elijah says in verse 19, "Give me your son." He took him from her arms, carried him to the upper room where he was staying, and laid him on his bed. Then he cried out to the Lord, "Lord my God, have you brought tragedy even on this widow I am staying with, by causing her son to die?" Then he stretched himself out on the boy 3 times and cried out to the Lord, "Lord my God, let this boy's life return to him." The Lord heard Elijah's cry, and the boy's life returned to him, and he lived. Elijah picked up the child and carried him down from the room into the house. He gave him to his mother and said, "Look, your son is alive." Then the woman said to Elijah, "Now I know that you are a man of God, and that the word of the Lord from your mouth is the truth." So Elijah is also shocked that this young man died, and he's like grieving as well. And there's even a sense here is like, God, why did you let this happen? So here's a man of God, a servant of Yahweh, who is unsure about what's going on. And I would just encourage us as we read through Elijah to remember that he's a human being, and he has emotions, and he has moments of uncertainty and doubt. And if Elijah, the man of God, has those feelings, then it's okay for us to have those feelings as well. The question is, what do we do with those feelings? Because Elijah didn't just give up when he had doubt. He prayed to the Lord, and here we see him when it says he laid out over him. Like, we don't really know what that is, and what he's doing here. Some people say it's like some form of like mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, some kind of CPR, trying to bring Elijah's body heat onto this young man's body heat to like revive him. We don't know what Elijah was doing. But in this process, the Lord heard his cry, and his life returned to him. And so this is a resurrection story. The boy was dead, but God brought him back to life. And so for this supernatural conflict between Yahweh and Baal, we have Baal, who everywhere he's being served is only associated with death and famine and drought. But Yahweh, in the midst of that environment, can come and bring life and bring resurrection. And so the woman then says, I know that the word of the Lord from your mouth is the truth. And so it's a transformation story. And it's pretty awesome to see that God is doing this in enemy territory. Yahweh is not limited to geography, which is good news for us. Chapter 18. After a long time, in the 3rd year, the word of the Lord came to Elijah. Go and present yourself to Ahab, and I will send rain on the land. So Elijah went to present himself to Ahab. Now the famine was severe in Samaria, and Ahab had summoned Obadiah, his palace administrator. Obadiah was a devout believer in the Lord. While Jezebel was killing off the Lord's prophets, Obadiah had taken 100 prophets and hidden them in 2 caves, 50 in each, and had supplied them with food and water. Ahab had said to Obadiah, go through the land to all the springs and valleys. Maybe we can find some grass to keep the horses and the mules alive, so we will not have to kill any of our animals. So they divided the land they were to cover, Ahab going in one direction and Obadiah in another. And so here we have the Lord telling Elijah, go talk to Ahab. It's time. And then we get a little picture of what's happening here. Because yes, Ahab is corrupt. Ahab and Jezebel, they're bringing all kinds of wicked practices into the land. We're told here that Jezebel is rounding up followers of the Lord and prophets and having them imprisoned and executed. Like, she's actively working against the Lord. But in the midst of the palace and all of the terrible things going on with Ahab and Jezebel, we have this guy, Obadiah. And this Obadiah is not the same Obadiah who wrote the book of Obadiah. That's a different person. But this person is a devout follower of the Lord. He is trying to serve God well. And he's in a place of significant influence in the palace. He's like the vizier of the whole kingdom. So he has resources that other people do not. And he has enough resources to like protect these prophets. And he's set aside 150 prophets, and he's feeding them and clothing them and watching over them, all the while Jezebel is out looking for prophets to execute. And so here he is a faithful person in the midst of great corruption. So we should pray for people like that in the world. Even now, there are people who are following the Lord in important political offices and appointments and different things. We should pray for those folks that they would serve well and honorably, like Obadiah. And so Ahab's plan, he recognizes the famine is severe. If they don't do something, they're going to have to start excuse me. I had to sneeze. That was coming for a long time. They are going to have to start putting down their horses, and their horses are tied not just to like farm work, but they're the horses that pull the chariots. And so if the horses die, then their army is going to get weaker and weaker and weaker. And one of the key phrases here as we talk about Yahweh is we're told that Obadiah was a devout believer in the Lord. And when we think about the Lord of hosts, another way to translate that is the Lord of armies. And so Obadiah is serving the Lord of armies, the Lord of hosts, the one who is not limited by earthly military power, while Ahab, who could have been, devoted to the Lord of hosts, is focused purely on the chariots and the military and trying to preserve his earthly power. Obadiah recognizes that there's something greater at work. And so they're dividing up to look for like hay and grass and things to feed their horses so that they don't have to kill the army, essentially the might of the army. Verse 7, as Obadiah was walking along, Elijah met him, which would be freaky. Obadiah recognized him, bowed down to the ground and said, "Is it really you, my lord Elijah?" "Yes," he replied. "Go tell your master, Elijah is here." "What have I done wrong," said Obadiah, "that you are handing your servant over to Ahab to be put to death? As surely as the Lord your God lives, there is not a nation or kingdom where my master has not sent someone to look for you. And whenever a nation or kingdom claimed you were not there, he made them swear they could not find you. But now you tell me to go to my master and say, Elijah is here. I don't know where the Spirit of the Lord may carry you when I leave you. If I go and tell Ahab and he doesn't find you, he will kill me. Yet I, your servant, have worshiped the Lord since my youth. Haven't you heard, my Lord, what I did while Jezebel was killing the prophets of the Lord? I hid 100 of the Lord's prophets in 2 caves, 50 in each, and supplied them with food and water. And now you tell me to go to my master and say, Elijah is here? He will kill me." Elijah said, "As the Lord Almighty lives, whom I serve, I will surely present myself to Ahab today." So Obadiah is like, I've been a good servant of the Lord all these years, and now you're saying go and tell Ahab, your greatest enemy, the person who is bringing you the most stress and worry and fear and angst, he'd like to meet you, but nobody's been able to find you. So he's saying things like the Spirit of the Lord might carry you away. And we will see in the story of Elijah, that will happen to him. He will be carried away by the power of God. But here, Obadiah is just like, I don't want to die. I've been trying my best here. So I need assurances from you that you're not going to go and just ghost me here and make me a dead person. And so Elijah promises. And so Obadiah went to meet Ahab and told him, and Ahab went to meet Elijah. When he saw Elijah, he said to him, "Is that you, troubler of Israel?" And this word, troubler of Israel, it should be reminding us that of the encounter with Saul and Samuel, and the trouble that Saul was creating for Israel because of his disobedience. Saul was the troubler, and now Ahab is calling Elijah the troubler. But the truth is, it's not the prophet who's causing the trouble. It is the disobedience of the king. It is the wickedness of the palace that is bringing the trouble on the people. And so we should just keep that in mind. Like, Ahab is projecting that Elijah is the problem, but Ahab is the problem. And Elijah replies, "I have not made trouble for Israel, but you and your father's family have. You have abandoned the Lord's commands and have followed the Baals. Now summon the people from all over Israel to meet me on Mount Carmel, and bring the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table." So that image of eating at Jezebel's table, like, this is how we know Jezebel's really the one who is providing for these prophets. Like, she's bringing them and they're feeding off of her largesse. Like, her resources, her food is going towards these wicked prophets. And so Elijah is summoning the people to Mount Carmel, and Mount Carmel is it's kind of closer to the coastline, and so you can see the Mediterranean from the mountain, and that'll come into play here later. And so Ahab sent word throughout all Israel and assembled the prophets on Mount Carmel. Elijah went before the people and said, "How long will you waver between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal is God, follow him." People said nothing. Now that word here, so the people, like it most likely is not the entire nation of Israel coming, but most likely the elders and leaders of different clans, of the different tribes of the northern kingdoms, they're here as representatives. And maybe they're retinues, but not like all the people of Israel are at Mount Carmel, but enough to see what God is up to here. And what Elijah's charging them with, he says, "How long will you waver between Yahweh and the Baals?" And this wavering sounds like, oh man, I'm thinking different thoughts, is part of our English translation. But the way the Hebrew is actually, how long will you go limping between the two? And so the imagery is like, you are weak, you are wounded, and you keep going back and forth thinking that this back and forthness is going to take care of you. You think that maybe Baal is going to be more able to support you, and he's not. So you come back to Yahweh half-heartedly because you don't think he's going to take care of you, and you see that your lack of faith is not helping. So you go back to Baal, and each time you go back and forth, you're only getting weaker as you're limping back and forth. And so that's the image that he's saying to them. And they said nothing because they recognize we are guilty of exactly that. And so then Elijah said to them, "I am the only one of the Lord's prophets left," which we remember Obadiah has spared a lot of prophets here. So he's not the only one, but he's the only one that's probably publicly working at this very moment. But Baal has 450 prophets. Get 2 bulls for us. Let's let Baal's prophets choose one for themselves and let them cut it into pieces and put it on the wood, but not set fire to it. I will prepare the other bull and put it on the wood, but not set fire to it. Then you can call in the name of your God, and I will call in the name of the Lord, the God who answers by fire. He is God. And then all the people said, "What you say is good." So the sign here, as they're building these, they're going to make these offerings, is fire. Whichever offering is consumed by fire, that's the one that we will know who the true God is. And this is a direct challenge again to Baal. So Baal is known for the rains and the harvest, but he also is known for the storms. And so like a lightning bolt can catch fire to dry wood, right? And so like if your God has the power to create fire through whatever means he's going to use, then we'll trust him. But Elijah is saying, "I will call in the name of the Lord who will answer by fire." And so again, this is another confrontation with Baal's reputation. And they agreed to do this. So Elijah said to the prophets of Baal, "Choose one of the bulls and prepare it first. Since there are so many of you, call on the name of your God, but do not light the fire." So they took the bull given them and prepared it. And so Elijah is highlighting here as well, like there are so many prophets here that Baal can't help but hear you. So go ahead. And so he's being a little snarky here. Like, you guys got this. There's so many of you. I mean, I'll let you guys go first so that you can just get this out of the way. And they're probably like, "Yeah, we know. Baal's awesome." However, they called on the name of Baal from morning till noon. So about 6 hours, let's say. "Baal, answer us," they shouted. But there was no response. No one answered. And they danced around the altar that they had made. At noon, Elijah began to taunt them. "Shout louder," he said. "Surely he is a god. Perhaps he is deep in thought or busy or traveling. Maybe he is sleeping and must be awakened." So they shouted louder and slashed themselves with swords and spears, as was their custom, until their blood flowed. Midday passed, and they continued their frantic prophesying until the time of the evening sacrifice, but there was no response. No one answered. No one paid attention. So Baal's prophets are trying to get Baal's attention. They have probably dancing, ecstatic utterances, all kinds of different things going on. And then Elijah starts taunting. And in our culture, it's weird, right? But in their religion, there are documents about Baalism that have been found in the ancient Near East, and different evidences that say like they did believe that Baal might fall asleep. and that he might travel and go away and need to be brought back. They also believed that every summertime Baal died and needed to be resurrected. And so the prophets would try to get him resurrected for the harvest, for the rainy season and the harvest and all these different things. And so these are the taunts that he is giving to them and saying about Baal are like things that they actually believed about Baal. And so part of the taunting is not the ridiculousness of the claims, because, they held on to that. It's more that, there are so many of you that your God can't even hear you still. Like no one listened, no one paid attention. And so the no one there is no God here. Baal is not God, is what the writer of 1 Kings is trying to help us see. So then Elijah said to all the people, "Come here to me." They came to him, and he repaired the altar of the Lord, which had been torn down. And this is an altar of 12 stones that would have been on Carmel, that he, like just 12 large stones. And so he built the altar again. Now, this is a high place. And so the Lord doesn't really want worship and these kinds of things happening on high places, but this is also a place where the people would have been willing to come, and where the Lord said, I will display my power wherever I can, is basically the mode of what's happening here. So he repairs the altar. Elijah took 12 stones, one for each of the tribes descended from Jacob, to whom the word of the Lord had come, saying, "Your name shall be Israel." With the stones he built an altar in the name of the Lord, and he dug a trench around it large enough to fill 2 seahs of seed. He arranged the wood, cut the bull into pieces, and laid it on the wood. Then he said to them, "Fill 4 large jars with water and pour it on the offering and on the wood." And this water, it's been a famine. And so the water would have been coming from the Mediterranean. So this is salt water. So they're not just wasting a bunch of fresh water, pouring it on this sacrifice. And again, contrast this, like the prophets of Baal, there's 450 of them, and they're doing all this work, working together. Elijah is one guy repairing the altar, preparing all the wood, cutting up the bull, putting it on the altar. He's doing all this work by himself, and the people are just watching him at this point. And then it goes like, "Hey, like fill up these jars, douse the whole situation here," because I mean, we live in the Northwest, and if you have a wood burning stove, like wet wood does not burn very well. It takes a long time, and it's you got to dry it out. And so Elijah is trying to say, like, no, let's get it very, very damp here. So they fill it. He says, "Do it again." And they did it again. "Do it a third time," he ordered. And they did it the third time. The water ran down around the altar and even filled the trench. So this is how totally soaked it is, that the water was caught in the trench, filled it up. At the time of the sacrifice, the prophet Elijah stepped forward and prayed, "Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known today that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant, and have done all these things at your command. Answer me, Lord, answer me, so these people will know that you, Lord, are God, and that you are turning their hearts back again." So his prayer is focused on, Lord, remind these people all that you've done. Remind them of your power. Remind them of your faithfulness. Show them an impossible thing here. Then the altar of the Lord fell. Then the fire of the Lord fell and burned up the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, and the soil, and also licked up the water in the trench. So it didn't just burn the bull, like the stones themselves were burned up. Like all of the water was evaporated. Like this is a significant amount of fire. When all the people saw this, they fell prostrate and cried, "The Lord, he is God. The Lord, he is God." Then Elijah commanded them, "Seize the prophets of Baal. Don't let anyone get away." They seized them, and Elijah had them brought down to the Kishon Valley and slaughtered there. And Elijah said to Ahab, "Go, eat and drink, for there is the sound of heavy rain." So Ahab went off to eat and drink, but Elijah climbed to the top of Carmel, bent down on the ground, and put his face between his knees. So Elijah defeat the prophets, has them executed, because a false prophet in the law should be executed. And there's 450 false prophets. They've been proven to be false prophets. It is all part of the law code for the people of Israel. And so they do this. And then he tells Ahab, start a party. Go ahead. I hear rain's coming. And there is no rain coming just yet, but he's a prophet and he's making a claim here. And if this doesn't come to pass, then who's the false prophet now? Elijah. It's only one time that a false prophet needs to be a false prophet to be called a false prophet. And so he says, go ahead, start your party. Rain's coming. So then he goes up to pray and humbles himself before the Lord. And he's praying. And it says 43, go and look toward the seas, he told his servant. And he went up and looked. There is nothing there, he said. So he's looking over the Mediterranean, which is where they're like rain clouds would come in the springtime off the Mediterranean. And so he says, okay, 7 times Elijah said, go back. The 7th time, the servant reported, a cloud as small as a man's hand is rising from the sea. And so the way to think about that is like if you like extended your arm and like looked out to gauge the size of the cloud, your fist would basically be the same size of the cloud. That's what he's saying. So Elijah said, go and tell Ahab, hit your chariots and go down before the rain stops you. Meanwhile, the sky grew black with clouds, the wind rose, a heavy rain started falling, and Ahab rode off to Jezreel. The power of the Lord came on Elijah, and tucking his cloak into his belt, he ran ahead of Ahab all the way to Jezreel. So Jezreel is where Ahab has this palace. And so the rain, like there's this one little cloud out there. And then eventually like that one cloud turns into the dark, heavy clouds that say, here comes rain. And as Pacific Northwesterners, we know those clouds. Like, oh, that's a rain cloud. And we know, get inside. But for people who haven't seen rain in years, probably be pretty alarming how quickly this storm picked up. And the fact that Ahab has to hitch his wagon and like get ready to go after Elijah had said, go ahead, throw a party. It's going to be fine. And then he takes off. But Elijah, by the power of God, is able to outrun Ahab's chariot back to Jezreel. And so he's going to beat him back to his palace. Ahab's not going to be happy about all that happens here. Like this is going to be not good news for Elijah, because chapter 19 picks up. It says, now Ahab told Jezebel everything Elijah had done and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. So Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah to say, may the gods deal with me, be it ever so severely, if by this time tomorrow I do not make your life like that of one of them. So Jezebel is making an oath to her gods, which should be a significant decision that somebody would do anything like that, to say, I'm going to have you executed tomorrow. So that's not going to go well for her, because Elijah was afraid and ran for his life. When he came to Beersheba in Judah, he left his servant there while he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness. So Beersheba is the southern border. So Dan to Beersheba is like from the top of the Israel all the way to the southern border of Judah. He's gone all this way. He went a day's, so from Beersheba, then he went a day's journey into the wilderness. He came to a broom bush, sat down under it, and prayed that he might die. I have had enough, Lord, he said. Take my life. I am no better than my ancestors. Then he lay down under the bush and fell asleep. Now, this should be something that maybe reminds us of another story of another prophet who found a bush and sat under it and wanted to die. And no, that's Jonah. And so Jonah and Elijah have some similarities here in their story. But often people say Elijah has depression. Some people might even would label him as bipolar. He has these up high highs and low lows. And here he's like suicidal. He's like, the power of Jezebel is coming after me. I might as well just die now. And so he's kind of giving up. But all at once, an angel touched him and said, get up and eat. He looked around, and there by his head was some bread baked over hot coals and a jar of water. He ate and drank, then lay down again. The angel of the Lord came back a second time and touched him and said, get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you. So he got up and ate and drank. Strengthened by that food, he traveled 40 days and 40 nights until he reached Horeb, the mountain of God. There he went into a cave and spent the night. So this angel comes and ministers to him, provides food and water cooked over hot coals. Now he's here by himself. So who brought the hot coals? Like, who baked the bread? This is an angel doing all of this for Elijah while he's wanting to die. And so he's in the wilderness alone and facing a temptation of sorts. And an angel comes and ministers to him. Let's fast forward to the ministry of Jesus. And in the Gospel of Mark, it says that Jesus went into the wilderness and fasted for 40 days and nights, and the devil tempted him there. And he overcomes the temptation. And at the end of that time, angels ministered to him. And so just a cool little parallel. Like they can cook for Jesus, and they could cook for Elijah. The Lord is taking care of Elijah, but then he gives him direction. He's feeding him because you got to go 40 days and you need to go to Mount Horeb, which is another name for Mount Sinai, which is where the Lord met Moses, where the Lord gave the law to the people of Israel. This Sinai experience is significant for the whole history of Israel. And so now Elijah, who is a prophet like Moses, who the Lord is using to call his people to faithfulness, Elijah now is going to Horeb, and he's going to have an encounter with the Lord as well. And so he's there, he's in a cave, and he spent the night. In verse 9, it picks up, and the word of the Lord came to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He replied, "I have been very zealous for the Lord God Almighty. The Israelites have rejected your covenant, torn down your altars, and put your prophets to death with the sword. I am the only one left, and now they are trying to kill me too." The Lord said, "Go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by." Then a great and powerful wind tore the mountain apart and shattered the rocks before the Lord, but the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind, there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake came a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire came a gentle whisper. When Elijah heard it, he pulled his cloak over his face and went out and stood at the mouth of the cave. Then a voice said to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He replied, "I have been very zealous for the Lord Almighty. The Israelites have rejected your covenant, torn down your altars, and put the prophets to death with the sword. I am the only one left, and now they are trying to kill me too." The Lord said to him, "Go back the way you came and go to the desert of Damascus. When you get there, anoint Hazael, king over Aram. Also anoint Jehu, son of Nimshi, king over Israel, and anoint Elisha, son of Shaphat, from Abel Mahola, to succeed you as prophet. Jehu will put to death any who escape the sword of Hazael, and Elisha will put to death any who escape the sword of Jehu. Yet I reserve 7,000 in Israel, all whose knees have not bowed down to Baal, and whose mouths have not kissed him." This is the technical theological term for what Elijah experiences here is called a theophany. So he's on Mount Horeb, and there is the great wind and the storm and the fire and the earthquake and all these things that are happening. And the writer tells us the Lord was not in any of those things. But then he hears this voice, "What are you doing here?" And this should also remind us again of Moses. Moses had the time that he was up on Mount Sinai, and he asked to see the Lord's glory. And the Lord said, "I will not show you my whole glory, but I will pass by, and you will see the tail end of my glory as I pass by." And so here we have an echo of Moses again, this theophany experience. Like you can't handle all of God's glory, but even as he's passing by, he's disrupting your whole environment. It's pretty amazing. And in this moment, he says again, like, "What are you doing here?" It's like, everybody's trying to kill me. I don't know what's happening. I've served you so well. And now like, it's almost the end for me. And so he didn't change any of his feelings from the previous time. But here the Lord said, the Lord isn't really putting up with any of that either, though. He says, no, just go do these things. He just puts him right back to work. Go to Damascus, anoint Hazael, anoint Jehu, anoint Elijah. They're going to basically be a domino effect of justice to bring people back into, to try to correct the nation of Israel. And Elijah does it. Like that's where he's at. But in this, he says, you feel like you're alone, Elijah, but there are 7,000 who I have reserved for myself, who have not bowed the knee, who have not kissed Baal. And so just keep going. It's basically what the Lord is saying to Elijah. Like, I have more people than you think. And the number 7,000, like when we see numbers like thousands in the Bible, we should recognize that those numbers are not like necessarily like exact numbers. So like the 7,000 we should think of it as, I have the perfect number of people that I want who have not bowed down to Baal. I am preserving enough people here. So Elijah, will you just trust me? And so that's part of what's going on here as well. One of the things that I want us to, look forward to as well here in the story of the Bible. We fast forward to life in the ministry of Jesus, and Jesus takes Peter, James, and John, and they go up a mountain. It's not Mount Horeb. They just go up a mountain, and they have an experience that we call the Transfiguration. And Jesus is radically transformed. He's full of splendor. His clothes are bleached white, and he's glowing and radiant. And there are two figures there who are meeting with Jesus, Moses and Elijah. These two figures who only saw the tail end of God's glory when they were up on Mount Horeb are now talking to the Son of God in all of his glory, face to face. That's pretty awesome. And so when we think about like, why those two people, and when the Transfiguration, why Moses and Elijah? And it comes back to these types of stories, these theophany events where they had this encounter with the glory of God. And so they're here now, like fast forward in the ministry of Jesus, and they're talking to him in that environment as well. Pretty awesome stuff. So Elijah, verse 19, Elijah went up from there and found Elisha, son of Shaphat. He was plowing with 12 yoke of oxen, and he himself was driving the 12th pair. Elijah went up to him and threw his cloak around him. Elisha then left his oxen and ran after Elijah. Let me kiss my father and mother goodbye, he said, and then I will come with you. Go back, replied Elijah. What have I done to you? So Elisha left him and went back. He took his yoke of oxen and slaughtered them. He burned the plowing equipment to cook the meat and gave it to the people, and they ate. Then he set out to follow Elijah and became his servant. So Elijah goes to do what the Lord says, and he finds Elisha. And we're these indicators here that we should note. He is plowing with 12 yoke of oxen. So he has enough land that he needs multiple pairs of oxen to plow it. And so he's not like, he doesn't have one like train of oxen. There's a bunch of different teams is what we should picture. So 12 yoke of oxen. So that's 24 oxen that are plowing this area. So Elisha's family has means. They are wealthy. They have a lot of land. They have a lot of people to work the land. They're doing quite good, quite well. And so Elijah comes and just puts his cloak on him. And this is, Elijah was probably somehow recognizable, maybe by the clothes he was wearing. Elisha knew what was happening. But by putting his cloak on him, most people would say that Elijah is saying like, I want to bring you into my ministry. And so this is why Elisha responds the way he does, like, whoa, let me go say goodbye to my parents. So when we think about this passage, I do want us to be thinking about Jesus here as well, because there's a story where Jesus is calling people to follow him, and he says to a man who says, "Let me go say goodbye to my parents," and Jesus says to that man, you must not look back. If you're plowing, you must not look back, and you need to be fully devoted to what I'm calling you to do. And so that should be also an echo back to this passage, because here Elijah is plowing and he says, "Let me just go say goodbye to my parents so they know what I'm doing." But then he takes his oxen and his plow and creates a bonfire with the wood from the plow, and then slaughters the oxen and gives it away to the people there. We're all going to have this barbecue here. This is a big farewell. I'm not coming back. And it's what Elisha is saying. All the means, all the wealth, all the things of my family, I'm letting that go to follow after Elijah. And so Elisha then it comes after him, and he becomes Elijah's servant. And as we think about Elijah and Elisha, there are things that there's going to be things that happen in Elisha's ministry that echo back to Elijah's ministry, but also there is a greater thanness in Elisha's ministry, that Elisha does more for Israel, but also the nations. He is a continuation and an expansion of God's ministry through the prophets. So when Jesus says to his disciples, "Greater things than these you will do," there is a sense of Jesus says, "I'm just this one guy. Yeah, I'm the son of God, and he's the son of God, right?" But he's saying, you're all going to be operating in the same power I'm operating in, and you will do greater things than these. So it's not just that you will do cooler things or better things, but greater in that the more things. You're going to do so much more to his disciples than Jesus did in his ministry. And that's this similar kind of vein that we should be thinking about with Elijah and Elisha. He will take it further. So, so we'll stop there. And next time we are back together, we'll do chapters 20, 21, and 22 and finish up 1 Kings. But do y'all have any questions on these three chapters, 17, 18, and 19? Jane, I see that hand.
Okay, I actually have a few.
Great.
Okay. Let's see, where to go? Elijah as important as Moses, and who else? In the Old Testament?
Oh, yeah. So the key figures in the Old Testament that we will think about a lot are Moses, Abraham, and David. Yeah. Right. And Elisha is up there with Elijah is up there with the important figures in the Old Testament.
Okay. So David and Abraham also.
Yeah.
Okay. So the drought that God caused, was it the southern kingdom too, the whole region? Or did he just show his power by doing just the northern kingdom and the other kingdoms around it?
Yeah.
It didn't say.
In this section, it doesn't say. So we would probably read it as from Bethel north.
Yeah.
Is where the famine was happening. The Lord will bring famine and drought to the southern kingdoms for their disobedience in other passages. That will happen. Right. But yeah, so this one we're looking based on just what the text says. We can only say we know it was Bethel north.
Okay, so because the Bible doesn't go in chronological order, right? So when the southern kingdom starts rebelling, it could be the same drought. It's just the way the story's written.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It could. Okay. Yeah, it could.
Yeah.
So
okay. It's interesting to me that the woman that was with Elijah, the one that took care of him, that she would automatically blame Yahweh and not Baal, however you say it, as punishing her. My reaction would be totally opposite. It's my God punishing me because I'm with this man.
Yeah.
Not worth it, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
That's just
well, part of what's going on there is Yahweh is a invading force right now with Elijah.
Okay.
Because Yahweh was considered to be the God of the Israelites. And
Right.
so Elijah coming into Sidon is invading enemy territory. And so anything that's bad that's happening is because of the present, she's probably thinking, is because of the presence of a representative of Yahweh. And so whether or not Yahweh is punishing her or Baal is punishing, either way, the presence of Yahweh is the problem, is what is being is being expressed in her attitude. And so, yeah. So, but I mean, Elijah is the representative of Yahweh here. So she's really saying, Elijah, you're the problem. You brought this to me. And so,
whether Baal is doing it or Yahweh's.
Yeah.
I mean,
and ultimately, we don't see, we can't blame Yahweh or Baal for this. This guy could have just died for any reason.
Right.
But she's ascribing it to a divine force. And so sometimes one of the things that we need to think through is sometimes bad things happen and people say, why would God do this to me? And, you know, we have to be able to say like, well, maybe God didn't do that to you. Some things just are the effect of sin in the world. And, you know, it's not like God's looking around just to smite you, because that's not his nature.
Well, I mean, in contrast to him providing the flour and the oil that never ran out, and then to turn around and say it's Yahweh's fault. The difference between it was right there every day in front of her. She had flour that she needed because Elijah was there, you know, as opposed to Elijah coming in as an invader. You know, it's just interesting to me.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, she's not unusual. And even today, there are people who will treat God as what have you done for me lately? And so God might do a lot of really great things for people. And then as soon as one bad thing happens, they're like, where are you, God? So
I hear you. Yeah. All right, this is going to sound weird. Is Baal a real god?
Oh, man.
I mean, a lesser god. I mean, that's huge. I know that's big, and you can say, we'll talk about it some other time. That's fine. It's just that, you know, he was shown up here to not be a real god, but then God is jealous of him.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. Seriously, if you want to just say, we'll talk about it later.
Well, no, this is a really good question, because one of the things that we need to be more comfortable with is that there is spiritual warfare in the world. There is an unseen spiritual realm that we don't have all the answers to. And so when we talk about the Lord of Lords, the Lord of Hosts, like there's Yahweh makes the claim to be the most powerful divine being, the most powerful supernatural being in all of creation. And in the scriptures, we see this to be the case. But there are other forces, other spiritual beings in the world. And so that they call gods. And so like Satan in the book of Job is a supernatural being. He's the word Satan means the accuser. So Hasatan is the accuser who is looking for people to accuse at the beginning of the book of Job. And the Lord says, have you considered my servant Job? You know, like this whole thing kicks off. So like at the beginning of the book, though, the Lord is having this like conference meeting with all of these supernatural beings, and Satan is one of them. And so there is a mystery in the supernatural world that we have to recognize. Like Baalism has a sort of power to it that people were attracted to.
Okay.
there is a being that people were worshiping. And so the most likely way to talk, the most sensible way to talk about Baal is a fallen angel, some kind of demon, some kind of force of evil in the world that people have pledged their allegiance to. And so Yahweh is jealous of his people, not because it's like, oh, Baal is so much more powerful than me. He's got a cooler car. He's got all these cool chariots. He's got better harvest. Baal's not jealous of Baal. Yahweh's not jealous of Baal because Yahweh knows, like, I'm so much better than you. He's jealous of the people's hearts that Baal is taking away. And so he's like, I want your heart. I want your life. I want good for you. And that's the jealousy of God. It is not like Baal. Oh man, Baal's got a better haircut. He doesn't care about any of those things.
Yeah, I really didn't mean that, but I was just in the realm of, is he real? That's what came to mind. So I'm glad you explained what that was all about.
Yeah, if you are interested, there is a guy, and I don't agree with everything that this guy says, but his name is Michael Heiser, and he has a book called The Unseen Realm, and it is an academic book. The Unseen Realm. And he has a shorter version called Supernatural. And these books are pretty helpful. I would start with Supernatural, and then if that's like scratching the itch, to go, oh, let's see what Unseen Realm's all about. These books are pretty helpful to get a sense of like this supernatural warfare that's happening in the Old Testament. Yeah, but again, I don't agree with everything Heiser says. I don't agree with all of his claims, but he has some interesting things that help like connect the dots for us. Because once we read the Bible, recognizing that this is not just a history book, but it is a book that engages with the supernatural in a way that our modern sensibilities are uncomfortable with, but the ancient world was not uncomfortable with. Things start connecting a little bit better in the Bible. So so The Unseen Realm and Supernatural by Michael Heiser.
Okay, I'll look those up. I have one more question.
Okay. I love these questions, by the way. These are great questions. So
okay, well, I'm glad you keep saying that, because I keep saying somebody else might want to talk. Okay, so the angel of the Lord tells Elijah to walk these 40 days and 40 nights over to Mount Horeb, right?
Yes.
And then God is asking, why are you here?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm a super practical person. So it's like the angel wouldn't act on his own.
Right.
So, why? I mean, what is your opinion of why that happens? It could be a meditation for 40 days and 40 nights, that kind of thing that he wanted Elijah to do. I mean, I have all kinds of different ideas, but why do you think?
Well, I think what's happening here is the Lord is inviting Elijah to confess.
Confess his
doubt, his fear. So like, yes, the Lord said, go to meet me at the mountain. And the Lord got him there, and he was like, okay, so what are you doing here?
Yeah.
What is this doing for you?
This fear of running away, what is this doing for you?
Yeah.
Let's see. Okay, yeah, I kind of got the I just couldn't put it in words. That he was telling him or teaching him something. But it has to do with his fear of running away from Jezebel.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I think is interesting here is the Lord asks questions. What are you doing here? What are you doing here?
Where are you?
Adam, where are you? That's an invitation to confession. God, of course. And even with with Jesus, like, people come to him and say, what's the best commandment? And he says, well, what do you think? His response is a question. Like, how do you read it? And like, I think one of the powers of good questions for like, even as parents, like there are times where like with our small children, we could tell them all the things, but we have to like asking them the question to say, what do you think is happening here? Well, it gives them an opportunity to develop an understanding of the world that they're in. And so I think that's part of what is happening here is the Lord's asking him because God knows what he's doing here, but does Elijah know what he's doing here?
Okay.
So, yeah, which like, I mean, this passage has so many different sermon applications in it, right? Like there's times where you read through First Kings and there's like a lot of stuff where it's like, I hope I never have to preach on this. But this is one of those passages where it's like, man, I can't wait till the next time I preach on this. Like there's so much.
Yeah, because there's so much there.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, thank you.
Those are all so good. Great questions, Jane. Thank you. Yeah. Any other thoughts or questions? Carrie?
Yeah, that's me. I just find it quite the paradox where he is so ballsy when he brings out the 400 prophets of Baal. He says, bring it on, and perhaps they're sleeping. I would say he probably was very cynical when he said that, making real fun of them, saying,
yes,
well, perhaps your God is sleeping. Maybe he went on vacation. But then he just goes back and forth. He can be very ballsy there, but then he's scared to death of Jezebel, a girl.
Well, Jezebel's not just a girl.
She's the
queen. She's probably more powerful really than Ahab is.
Yeah.
Because she's the daughter of a king, and the wife of a king. So she's got Ahab's might and her daddy's might.
Double whammy on him.
Yeah. And also like one of the things you mentioned, and I didn't really get into, there is some subtlety to what Elijah is saying and taunting the prophets of Baal. One of the things, one of the ways that people have, when he's meditating, it's maybe he's using the bathroom as part of like what some people have translated this as well as like he's indisposed. So, but these were all things that they really thought about Baal. Like he had a wife, he would get sleepy, he needed you to wake him up. And Elijah's point is like, my God doesn't need anybody to wake him up. He never sleeps. And so, yeah.
But then later on, it just seems that he has his high, like you talked about, he has highs and lows where he's very full of himself. And then like, oh, I don't know if I can do this,
Yeah, I want to be careful to not say that Elijah is full of himself.
Yeah, not full of himself, full of God.
He's confident in God's power.
Yeah.
And so he's able to move forward and confront the prophets of Baal because he's confident of God's power. But this threat then that comes to him from Jezebel is it's not prophets who serve a weaker God. It's the military power of two nations that could come and try to kill him.
Yeah.
And so it's not that Elijah doesn't believe that God is powerful as much as he's like, well, this is a different kind of thing now. Like the prophets, I knew they had nothing, but this lady's got a whole bunch of swords. And so like, that's part of what we should keep in mind. Like there is a supernatural battle that's happening, but then there's a very natural battle that's happening.
It's the humanity part of it. That's the human part of him.
Yeah.
That's so afraid.
Yeah.
It was the other thing I was going to say. It's not too far off the mark from any one of us in reality.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. There are things where it's like, we tend to, I mean, even like coming up on Christmas, right? There's going to be, if you're going to a family dinner, there might be things that's like, I don't really know if I should talk about that with this person. And whatever that is with the topic, could be politics, could be religion, could be all kinds of things. And it's not that we have a lack of faith in the Lord's power to save, as much as we get nervous that this uncle or this daughter or this parent, they might not like us anymore.
Yeah.
And that's the fear. So it's not like we doubt God, but we also are afraid personally for our interpersonal relationships. So, so we make this big, huge, like, nations are coming against Elijah claim, but then it's also like when I'm passing the gravy to my uncle, like he might look at me with dagger eyes and I don't want that. So we're not much better than Elijah. So
Exactly. Yeah. The other thing too is like the Bible just kind of talks about something and drops it. The 100 prophets that are tucked in 2 caves.
yeah.
What happened to them? My curiosity bends.
Yeah, well, we will see Elisha will start a school of prophets, and
Right.
these might be some of those people. So
Yeah.
yeah, but we don't really know. I mean, they're not really, the writer of Kings is not really concerned about that detail right now.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, and even here, though, part of what the Lord's saying is like, I have all these people, this number of 7,000. I have these 7,000 people who, they're faithful to me. Like,
Yeah.
you feel alone, Elijah, but you're not alone. Like, you're isolated, and that's a different thing.
Yeah, self-isolation.
Yeah, he was social distancing way before COVID made anybody do that. So yeah.
We're all tired of that.
Yeah.
So interesting. So these prophets that are in the caves, they might just be people who are true to God. Because I always think of prophets as people who prophesy. So maybe not, we don't know.
We don't know what that all means yet. We don't know.
Okay.
So yeah, but there are prophets that will be a part of the Northern Kingdom throughout the history. There will be prophets around. So yeah, so we don't know all of
major
those
prophets, lesser prophets.
A mix of both. Yeah. So
okay.
Yeah.
Catholic.
Yeah. All right. Any other questions or thoughts, observations?
I have one more.
Okay.
You want to hear it?
Oh,
Lord
great.
of hosts. This is the way my mind works. Lord of hosts. I'm so literal. I was raised Catholic, and I thought it was the Lord of the host that they hold up as the bread. And just tonight it was like, oh, hosts, like of people. I was just like, boing. Yeah. Just an observation.
Yeah. And that phrase hosts could be translated as armies. The Lord of armies, and like in particular angel armies. And so there's a song, I think by Chris Tomlin, where he talks about the Lord of angel armies.
Yeah.
So
it never connected the two. It was always the angels of hosts.
Yeah.
And see, I'm very literal.
Well, no, but part of that the mass that you're talking about, like it's called the host as the priest holds it up, because it's in their theology, it is now hosting the literal body of Christ. Like the bread transubstantiates, it changes its substance to become the body of Christ. And so they call it the host because in raising it up and blessing it, they're saying like, this is now the body.
Hosting the body of Jesus.
Yeah.
I never got that either. I was in Catholic school for 12 years. Never got that.
Sometimes we need to be in the right place with the right curiosity to catch these things. So like when we're swimming in that water, we don't think about the water. It's just the culture that we're in, and we don't ask these questions. And then, years later, we might be like, oh, that's what that was.
Yeah, that's what we meant.
Yeah. So we have to let our life kind of shape our curiosity sometimes to then like go like, oh, now it's all coming together. So yeah. But
okay. Well, thank you.
Like when it talks about heavenly, God of heavenly hosts, it should be our first clue there's a different realm.
Yes. Yeah. Well, yeah. There's a lot going on there. So like in the at Luke 2, we're coming up on Christmas Eve. I'm going to preach on Luke 2. The angel comes to the shepherds and says, hey, go to Bethlehem. And they're like, oh, okay. And then as the angel's about to leave, like the lights of the heavens fill with the hosts of angels worshiping and praising God. Like, so all of this army of angels, the day that Jesus was born, they just start singing. That's pretty awesome. It's pretty amazing. So, yeah.
Well, we could call it a God party.
Yeah, well, it is
It was
Yeah.
a God party.
Yeah.
for sure. So,
That's so cool.
yeah,
Well, thank you so much.
yeah.
Good
Thank
talk.
you. So next week we are not meeting, and the week after we are not meeting, but that first week in January, we'll be back together. So that's the plan. All right. So enjoy your Christmas break. Yeah, let's have a wonderful week, everybody.
You also. Thank you for all of this.
You bet. It's my
Been
joy.
great.
So have a good night, everybody.
You
Thank
also.
you.